Welcome back. Let me ask you two questions. How much is enough? And when you get enough, what do you do with the leisure? Those are two questions that I answered very precisely in episode 1. And I had a lot of pushback, which I love because I love rebuttals to my arguments. One person who gave me the strongest pushback was a friend of mine called Milton. Now, Milton is one of these fabulously wealthy people. 5 cars, 5 drivers, house in the hills, major mansion, factories everywhere, employs hundreds of people. And what he said to me is, I couldn't disagree with you more. Now, what is it I said that he disagreed with? Well, I gave the answer as follows. How much is enough? I said enough is enough when you have perpetual passive cash flow that is 7 times your cash outflow. Let me say that again. Enough is enough when you have perpetual passive cash flow that is 7 times your cash outflow. And what do you do with the leisure once you get that? You pursue education and culture, what I called the aristocratic investor class lifestyle. Now, Milton's problem with that is he loves his life. Of course he does. He has it all. A beautiful wife, beautiful kids, flies off to exotic places on the weekends. And his argument is that he wants to work until he drops. Those who have the most toys win. That's the essence of that argument. And you know what? It's pretty persuasive on the surface. But I have a response to his argument that really falls into 3 steps. First, happiness is not fulfillment. Fulfillment is character, and character can only be pursued full time when you are part of the aristocratic investor class. So let's look at this one by one. Essentially, what Milton is telling me is that when he's running around in these 5 cars of his, he's loving it. He's loving essentially the outcome of his hard work, the lifestyle he generates from his hard work. And he wants more of it. Makes sense. But how is that any different from Mary, the person we discussed in another episode, who gets her kicks from narcotics? Both of them seek a life of sensual pleasure, and therefore they're happy. Mary's really happy when she has narcotics available, and Milton is very happy when he goes to work. But it's really the same thing as happiness. But what Aristotle and Plato said, along with ancient philosophers going back to the ancient Hindu Upanishads, which were written arguably 1,500 years before Christ, what new philosophers like Aristotle and Plato said was that fulfillment is when an object performs its function. So an example that I could use is a water jug. A water jug's function is to be filled with water. And when it's filled with water, it's fulfilled. So the object was not to seek sense pleasure, according to Aristotle and Plato, but it was to do what human beings are uniquely capable of, to do what a human being has as a function of nature, and that to them was character. Now, to figure out what character is, there's a lot of definitions, but one person that I really like is Cicero, who was an orator in the 1st century before the birth of Christ. And And he was a Roman orator, and he defined character as wisdom, justice, might, courage, and temperance. So let's just use that definition. Now you'll notice that wisdom is first. The Christians call it wisdom, the ancient Hindus call it samadhi, and the Buddhists call it enlightenment. Many religions have some term for this exalted state that is called wisdom in the West. But it's more than wisdom. Along with wisdom, it is these noble qualities of justice and might and courage and temperance. And so then the question is, if you take Cicero's definition, where can you pursue and how can you pursue this as man's function, as a means of the fulfillment of the nature of man? And the answer that I gave in episode 1 is you can fulfill it only through the aristocratic investor class lifestyle if you want to pursue it 100% of the time, what I call the 0-hour work week. Now, let's look at an example to make this more concrete. There was an aristocrat by the name of Rabindranath Tagore in Bengal who is an epitome to me of what an aristocrat is and should be as an ideal. He was a complete polymath. He composed poems, he wrote plays and novels, he played musical instruments, he used to draw, and he was a great philanthropist. In fact, he even created a university in a place called Shantiniketan, which was on one of his estates. And he could do that full time because he had the leisure of being able to live off of land and the income of tenant farmers. Now, my point in episode 1 was that this was in the late 1800s, that in today's society, in the post-industrial society, you have financial contracts that allow you to generate passive cash flow. You no longer have to have tenant farmers. And in fact, there are many advantages to having these kinds of contracts. But the point is that he led an exalted life. He led the kind of life that I believe we can aspire towards. Because I think that sense of noblesse oblige is really lost in society. In today's society, we pay our taxes and expect the government to do so-called good works. But in the old days, aristocrats used to have skin in the game. They would actually feel a sense of connectedness to their community and engage in civic duty, like Rabindranath Tagore did with his university. And I think that's lacking. So what we did is we took this concept of aristocracy from the age of landed aristocracy, and we got rid of it, and we threw out the baby with the bathwater. Because in modern society, if you can go from working class to middle class to investor class, as long as there's social mobility, then there's really nothing wrong with the ideals of an aristocracy. And so civic engagement, that connectedness, that sense of being larger than accumulating things and using the freedom of passive cash flow to cultivate yourself, that to me is the goal. But Milton disagrees. And I can understand the logic of his argument. I just happen to disagree. So what do you think? Who's right or who's wrong? Actually, let me rephrase that, because in a value judgment, there is no right and wrong. Who has the better argument, Milton or me? Let us know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.